All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Derek Dwayne Scott II. I hope everyone's doing well today. Located right now in Atlanta, Georgia. So if anybody's in Atlanta that's joining, we'll shout out to you. But I have the pleasure of serving as our Young Alumni Council Vice President. And the purpose of the Young Alumni Council is, of course, to make sure that we're serving our young alumni base. And if you're even a student right now tuning in, we serve you as well, because one day you will be young alumni. This group that we're speaking to today represents about 37% of all living alumni, right? 37%. So our goal is to make sure that no matter what part of the country you're located in, that you feel connected, that you feel a part of the Florida State student body and alumni body, and that we're serving all of your needs. So this alumni network series, which is the first of its kind, was aimed and created and crafted by our council for you specifically. During this time right now with the pandemic going on, our number one goal is to make sure that you feel connected, that you feel a part of this beloved university and our amazing alumni base. And so without saying more, I'm actually going to tell you that we have two amazing presenters prepared today to give you a lot of tips and tricks on how to navigate those relationships throughout the holiday season. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first presenter, and her name is Rebecca Healy. Rebecca Healy is a licensed clinician, social worker with experience working with adults, adolescents, children, and families, including those experiencing severe and persistent mental illnesses. She began her career in social work, providing life skills to individuals experiencing homelessness, reestablishing themselves in society. And she's also worked with adults diagnosed with disorders, juvenile offenders, and children in foster care. She actually is a double no and received 2 bachelor degrees, not only in psychology, but also in family child sciences, but also had her master's in social work back in 2015. So I want to give a warm virtual welcome to Miss Rebecca Healy. All right. And secondly, we have Miss Amani Williams. Miss Amani Williams. Thank you, Felicia. I appreciate it. We have Miss Amani Williams, who is a licensed clinical social worker, certified life coach, and certified mindfulness practitioner, skilled in helping clients decrease worry, calm anxiety, improve their mood, and end pattern of negative thinking. I need that from time to time. Does anybody else need that? Shout out in the chat. Her experience is in anxiety, depression, and substance abuse treatment through cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing. Imani graduated from Florida State University with her bachelor's in social work and a master's in clinical social work. Currently, Imani works as a crisis assessment supervisor at a local hospital assisting Baker Acts across the South Florida region. South Florida is in the house. Imani also owns and operates her own private practice, Hope Abundance Behavioral Health, LLC, which offers therapeutic services, including individual psychotherapy, group therapy, family therapy, clinical case management, and substance use counseling. In her spare time, she enjoys traveling, reading, yoga, and playing the drums. So I want to give another warm welcome to both Miss Imani and Rebecca. And I want to remind everyone that's here participating that our question and answer and chat box will be open during the duration of this discussion. So please, please, please submit those, and we will review those during the question and answer session. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand it back over to Imani and Rebecca. Take it away.
So Imani's going to put our PowerPoint up for you guys, and we really decided that we needed to start this PowerPoint with awareness, right? And in that, we have made a list of challenges that may come up in relationships, whether that is with family, intimate, peers, whatnot, right? So this is not a comprehensive list. So if you guys, as I'm going through this, want to be chatting what we've missed, we do not want to assume that this is a full list. So let's see what we got. So coping. We might have people within families that have great coping skills, and there might be other family members that we have that have a lack of coping. And this can deal with a variety of issues, whether that be religious, spiritual values, traditional values, rituals. The next one we did not want to forget is disagreements over sexuality and gender identity. This next one, loss of identity, it always brings me back to the Mean Girls, right? where, you know, you might have a change at what makes you an individual in a relationship. And I always cut back to that scene where we wear pink on Wednesday. So even if you don't like pink and that's just how it is, right? That's an example of like sometimes how we can like lose ourselves like in a relationship. Daily disagreements. So those things could be over small things or over large things. And I wanted to really touch on a point here about daily disagreements and how that turns into a barrier. Because if we are spending all of our energy on day-to-day conflicts, what we're not doing is learning from our past mistakes or planning and progressing into the future with that person or with those family members. So that goes into, we all have different expectations. We have different ways of resolving our problems. And last but not least, sometimes we might feel like we belong to an unsupportive family. And so the question here that I have as like a discussion that I wanted to bring up was, how do we react when we feel like we're not being supported? And this links back to that awareness. Like we need to be aware. So
I had one thing that I would like to add to this slide. The pandemic has changed how we participate in relationships drastically. With the pandemic, some of us are quarantining with people, some of us are not. Some of us enjoy the people we are quarantining with, some people do not. And those have created some really unique challenges. The pandemic in itself has created some really unique challenges in trying to navigate relationships. And I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah. And I mean, I see we already have, you know, a question about COVID and comfort levels. And this is where any therapist will tell you, you have to have clear communication. You have to have clear boundaries. And you have to know how to set them. That's, you know, a discussion that you have to have with that person. You know, if you know they're the one that's uncomfortable, you know you're the one that's uncomfortable, you have to figure out a respectful way to speak about it. So building a culture of appreciation. This, I feel like, is the goal when you are trying to navigate these relationships. And there are a variety of ways that we can do this. So the main point that I wanted to point out here is we are who we are based on those individual experiences that we have. Every second that we are alive, we are a different person that next second based on what happened that second before. And so some factors that go into this perspective, into this experience, are your ability to maybe be vulnerable or your ability to understand your self-worth. So Brene Brown has a really great TED Talk on this, and it's called Vulnerabilities. And she makes this great point about how being vulnerable in relationships is that point in which it becomes a barrier or it becomes that point for growth. If we're not able to speak clearly to that person and tell them what we're concerned with, then we're not moving forward in that relationship. And so shame goes into that, vulnerability goes into that, blame goes into that. We might not want to put ourselves in that position where we are vulnerable and we have to be the one that addresses a concern with somebody else. But if we believe that we are worth it, then we will find a way to have that conversation with them because we deserve it. So I put some questions up here that I would like to see some answers to. So, you know, what happens when we're fearful and we fear that we're not worthy of those connections that we deserve, and we're in that spot where we're not willing to be vulnerable? How do we make progress if we're not willing to speak up for what we deserve? And how do we be compassionate to ourselves? How do we show ourselves that self-care? And last but not least, how do we be authentic to our own identity? And that kind of goes back to one of those challenges on the last slide about losing our identity, right? even if we're in a relationship, even if we're in a family, we still get to be unique and an individual. So, Stacey, Amani, what do you have to say about this slide?
I love what you said about being honest about who you really are and what you really want out of relationships. I think a lot of times it gets easy to fail to do so because we're afraid of maybe losing relationships. Right now in a pandemic, isolation is a huge issue. And in a lot of instances, people fear that isolation because human contact is a basic human need. But just because we have those fears and those concerns doesn't mean we shouldn't be telling people what we really think and what we really feel and setting boundaries. Because when you do so, it allows you to participate in a relationship in a very honest manner, as opposed to kind of maybe putting your wants and your feelings on the back burner and people pleasing.
Yeah. So, you know, we all deserve to get our needs met. We all deserve to get our desires met. And so, you know, part of that building a culture of appreciation is finding how to manage our social roles, which is the concept that I don't speak to Amani the same way that I talk to my boss, right? I don't talk to my sister the same way I talk to the police, right? We all have to manage our multiple different identities, and we have social roles specific to different family groups. So, I mean, that goes along with the boundary setting. We might have very different boundaries for our extended family or our, you know, husband's family than we do for our own. So.
Next slide.
Yeah.
All righty. So I love what Rebecca said at the end, where we have kind of different roles in different parts of our relationships or with different people. We also have different roles in different parts of the community. I make no bones about it. I'm a queer Black woman. So there's the role that I have in that space. Then there's the role that I have as a therapist. Then there's the role that I have as an auntie and a daughter and supervising staff and owning a private practice. All those are different roles, and I show up in very different ways in those different roles, especially given what we're experiencing now politically, what we're experiencing now culturally. All those different things affect how I show up. So in each different relationship, there are different bonds. And we want to talk about attachment theory a little bit. So attachment theory is basically, there are 4 different ways that we attach to people. There are 4 different ways that we show up in relationships. I will start with the bottom right-hand one, fearful attachment. I'll start with some of the most problematic ones and work my way up to secure attachment. And the reason I'd like to point some of these things out is so that we can be aware of how we're showing up in relationships. And relationships aren't just us, they're dialectic, they're a two-way street. We also want to be aware of how people are showing up in relationships with us so that we can make sure that we're engaging with the world in a healthy manner, okay? So the first one I'm going to start off with is fearful attachment. And again, you may have different forms of these different types of attachment with different people. However, most people tend to use a similar style of attachment in the majority of their relationships. I.e., my attachment to my mom or my dad might be fearful, but my attachment to my friends might be secure. However, if I was raised in a fearful attachment environment, I will more than likely engage in fearful attachment styles in the majority of my relationships. So with that being said, let's talk about what fearful attachment is. So fearful attachment is the sort of relationship where you have a negative view of yourself. You don't think the world is very good. So you don't necessarily think you are a good person, and you don't necessarily think the world is filled with good people. They want closeness. They very much want to be close to people, but they're afraid of being vulnerable. So they may avoid closeness even though they really want it. And so a lot of times they can show up in relationships as sort of schizophrenic or disorganized. You never know what you're going to get. And a lot of that has to do with their fear of either losing people or fear of being, let's say, fear of being appraised in the wrong way. fear of being misunderstood. And that's what that word disorganized means. So because of that, they're very fearful of making connections. These sort of people can sometimes be abusive to other people or themselves. There's something wrong with me, no one can love me. So that's a great little quote to kind of explain who these sort of people are. Then you've got avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment you find very commonly in spaces that kind of really are patriarchal. They have a positive view of themselves, negative view of others, very independent, self-reliant. They are very difficult to get close to other people. They put up walls, leaves or avoids during conflict. So a lot of times we socialize certain people into certain gender roles. And this is one of those things you see in that kind of relationship. And it can be very difficult to deal with because these are the sort of people who will stonewall you when you're trying to maybe build connection or you're trying to talk about maybe some conflict. You may get stonewalled and you may not get much progress. So these are people that are very difficult to build relationships with. Then we've got anxious attachment. I think of these people as exhausting, okay? So they have a very negative view of themselves, but a positive view of others, i.e., I don't think I'm much, but that person has something that I want, that person has something that I want. I really wish I could be that. And sometimes they may have a difficult time growing within themselves. These people can be very emotionally dependent. And that's where the exhausting piece comes in. They fear losing relationships, so they can be very clingy. They have emotional highs and lows, right? So there's no kind of happy balance. Either they're extremely, extremely attached and extremely happy to be here, or they sometimes drop into a very low place and they want you to come seek them out and help pull them out. So again, that's where the exhaustive piece comes from. In some instances, they can be aggressive. I already talked about clinginess upon separation, and they're very fearful of losing relationships because they don't like themselves. She'll let me down, he'll leave me. Then we've got the healthiest version of attachment, secure attachment. Positive view of self, positive view of others. They're interdependent, meaning they can work independently or with other people. They're comfortable with emotional intimacy, comfortable with closeness. They have a lot of healthy relationships and bonds. They're secure and trusting, right? Now, what we find is many people have a mix of these things. Rebecca, is there anything you would like to add to the conversation here?
Yeah, while you were talking, I was thinking, and I feel like avoidant attachment, right? They'll set boundaries to protect themselves, right? Whereas like fearful attachment, they might be like setting boundaries just because they don't necessarily know how to like work within that relationship. And like securely attached individuals, like when I think about them, they have developed like communication skills. They actively listen. Mm-hmm. They're able to admit when they're wrong. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like where you want to be. You know, you want to be like securely attached. And also, okay, this is what I was really wanting to point out too. When we're securely attached to our family members, our loved ones, our friends, what we're not doing is limiting who they hang out with or what they do. You're almost comfortable with like the space, you know, like you can hang out with your other friends or you can hang out one-on-one with those family members without me. Like I don't have to be there all the time, right?
Amen. Because securely attached people tend to use that time for self-care.
Yeah.
Whereas your anxious attached, your fearful attached will spend that time possibly chasing instead of using that time for self-care or pouring into themselves or loving on themselves or being kind or gentle to themselves. So I love what you added to this conversation. Any other things before I move on to the next slide?
No, I think we covered that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so because we're raised in certain environments where we may attach in different ways, I thought it important to bring up the idea of codependency. This is a term that's kind of hot right now. Everybody's saying it, kind of like toxic is one that I hear a lot of. So this is one of those things that has got a lot of attention right now in the behavioral health world, and it's because it's important. So codependent people tend to be anxiously attached or fearfully attached. And what we mean by codependent, I'll read you the definition. So codependency is a relationship imbalance when one person or both people enables another person's addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement. Now, here's the biggest core piece of being codependent. Codependency is an excessive reliance on approval from others for a sense of self or identity, i.e., the approval doesn't come from within. They need that external approval to feel validated in the world. And that is why, again, they're anxiously attached or fearfully attached or avoidantly attached, because there's something within them that they're not capable of really accepting their true selves. And so they feel as though they have to go out in the world and find acceptance so that they can love themselves, but that is really backwards. That's not how any of this works. So I want to talk about some of the characteristics of codependence. And a lot of times this happens in our family relationships, and we don't mean to do it. It just happens. A lot of time we want our parents' approval. We want our family's approval. And so this kind of can happen. So one of the first characteristics is disconnected self, meaning you don't know who you are, and you're so busy trying to people please that you sometimes shapeshift, sort of like a chameleon, and you maybe are doing what you need to do to be accepted in particular environments. The second part is denial. We all know what the meaning of denial is, but denial in this aspect means that they are not aware of their codependency. Sometimes they're obsessed with relationships or with how they appear on the outside. They tend to repress their own feelings so that they can continue to people please and get the validation that they need. Sometimes they're controlling. And again, this list is not exhaustive, and it doesn't mean that all codependent people have every single one of these characteristics. What it means is that codependent persons may have a mix of these characteristics in any way. So I'm sorry, I wanted to preface that. Lack of trust, anger, dependence, relationship problems, weak boundaries. And again, those weak boundaries exist because they're trying to people please. So instead of setting their own boundaries, they tend to set boundaries based on what they feel will make other people love or accept them. Problems in sex, poor communication, and weak boundaries go hand in hand. So Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
So I think this has a big play on what I was talking about earlier with like vulnerability and self-worth. You know, codependency, as I've seen it in some relationships, can look like, I can't exist without this person, right? I need to know their opinion before I make a decision, right? When in reality, if you have that comfortable level of self-worth and you are okay with kind of like leaning into this comfort, I have to say it at least once, right? And being vulnerable, right? You'll be able to like make your own decisions and know that your family members will support you in that, right? Like, so I think
the important part, sorry to cut you off, is making those decisions based on what makes you happy.
Right.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Just wanted to include that.
No, that was it. Like, yeah. And you know, the other thing that I like jotted down too is I think this also has to do with like expectations, right? And like as we're like progressing in ourselves and in our relationships with our families and our loved ones, you know, an expectation that I set 5 years ago when I was like, you know, in high school or when I was in college, and now I'm like a full-grown adult, right? We might have to be changing or adapting those expectations. Like as we change as individuals, we can't expect the family structure in our relationships to exist exactly the same.
Amen. Okay, I see some questions in the Q&A and I want to get a chance to answer them because they're popping up, and I want to answer them while we're maybe on topic, because my assumption is that they're popping up because of the specific topic we're on. So Derek, I think you were the one managing the Q&A. Are you able to read those?
Yeah, not a problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Got it. So pertaining and this is in the, excuse me, this is in the chat that I'm seeing here. Someone was asking, how can I ensure that I carved out time for myself during the holidays, right? I know we've been on topic about, treating yourself or making sure that you're not putting your needs on the back burner, excuse me. So that was question number one. Do we want to answer that one first?
Okay. Do you want to grab that one, Rebecca, or do you want me to get it?
Yeah, and so I think that like plays into like the self-care aspect, and you have to be the expert on yourself. You are the expert on yourself. You are going to be the one who knows when you need time. You're going to be the one who knows when you need space. And so you're going to have to do some self-exploration on what coping skills give you that what you need. And if you feel like, I don't know, is this maybe linked to like some overbearing family members or something where they're like, all like, we need you for this, bake cookies for 5 hours straight with me, like I think. And if that's the case, then I think that goes back to like communication, and you get to say, hey, I just helped you bake the whole turkey yesterday. I might be able to come over at 3, but I'm not going to be able to come over at 8 a.m. Right. And you just have to be comfortable with like being clear in like a respectful way, what you can and what you can't do.
Amen. I would like to piggyback on that and say, yes, number one, what she said is perfect. You've got to know yourself and know what helps you either calm down or feel better. So you've got to tune into yourself. You also need to know when you're getting to the point of exhaustion, right? And a lot of times, because we're raised in American culture that teaches us, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work, 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 work. A lot of times we don't give ourselves the self-care until we're already burnt out. And then we're exhausted and we don't want to go back to things as they were. So it's really important to give yourself the self-care before you get burnt out. So it's important to practice self-care on a daily basis. One of the things I give a lot of my clients in private practice, I don't know if you can see this, it's a weekly activity planner, right? This works great. And what I tell clients to do is schedule their self-care in. I need to see at least 3 self-care items a week on here. I don't care how stupid they are, right? Or how little they may seem. I don't care if it's you just like watching Real Housewives of Atlanta, whatever it is that helps you to kind of calm down and recenter yourself. Maybe it's taking a bath. I love going to Lush and getting 50,000 of those bath bombs. That's me. That's who I am. I'm the sort of girl who likes a mani-pedi. Whatever it is, sometimes I have to call Rebecca and say, can I bend your ear about some foolishness? So reaching out. So I tell people schedule at least 3 instances of self-care. The other thing I ask my clients to do is to schedule time to complain. To have those moments where you acknowledge some crazy crap happened. This bothered me. And, I need someone to talk to about it, or I'm going to journal about it, or whatever it is. But we do have to acknowledge that there are times that the world is kind of hard on us, especially in a pandemic.
Yeah. And, another aspect of this too might also to be like to do for others, right? Like there's a lot of benefit we get from even like simple things like let me hold the door for the person behind me, right? Like, and so it doesn't have to be like a global thing, like a huge thing you're doing for yourself. It doesn't have to be like a massive thing you're doing for somebody else. But just like finding time to either give to yourself or give to others can really assist with that.
Okay, I love that. What was the other question?
No problem. And I hope people are taking notes because I am feverishly writing right now. These are gems. Okay. Second question. How should we approach situations where you have maybe a lot of people with different type of attachment styles, right? Like what if a person has very negative attachment styles while others are very positive? What should you do to navigate that type of polarizing situation?
This one I'll grab. So when clients come in for therapy, we talk about the 5 stages of change. Pre-contemplation, right? Where they don't even know it's an issue. Contemplation, where they may be aware it's an issue. Maybe family's complaining a little bit. Maybe your wife, husband, children, somebody is saying, hey, you're riding on my nerves. Then you've got action, where you actually come into therapy, or you come into a helping setting that's helping you evolve or change whatever the problem is. It doesn't necessarily have to be therapy, right? Then you've got maintenance and relapse. The two go hand in hand, because as you're trying to change, right, you may fall back into your old habits, but you also want to build coping mechanisms that help you maintain the new behavior that you're trying to learn. Now, here's the reason I told you about the 5 stages of change. When someone comes into the helping space and they're saying, I want to change, if they're in pre-contemplation, then there's not much you can do, right? If they're in contemplation or action, then you know you've got somebody you can work with. I say all that to say, here's how you avoid wasting your time. If you see a person is in the contemplation stage or pre-contemplation, you may want to back off for your own mental health.
Right.
And I know that's hard in a pandemic.
Yeah,
go ahead, Rebecca, I'm sorry.
Well, it's especially hard when these are our family members, right? Because like, how do you just like back off of it being a family member? But here is like the flip side, right? If I am continuing to pour my energy into a relationship and the person doesn't know that they have a problem, or the problem has been presented to them and they don't care or don't want to address it, that is when your mental health suffers, because you're putting all this effort in and they're not. And that's not the reflection on you, that's the reflection on them.
Yes. Okay. Love that. The other thing is, if they're a family member or somebody you're living with, I'm sorry if you heard that, there's very fast, fancy cars going by. But if they're people you love and you know you can't get rid of them, it's not always that easy. What you can do is set firm boundaries and hold them. What I've learned is I make people earn moving the boundary back. You don't just get the boundaries moved back. Based on your behavior, I have to set boundaries in a certain manner. And if your behavior is problematic, or I see that you are attempting to manipulate my boundaries instead of respecting them, I push the boundary forward. I do not make it pull it back. I will only pull the boundary back when your behavior changes. And if I tell you you're doing something and it is hurting me and you choose not to change, then that means you probably don't care about me in the manner that I deserve.
Right.
Those are all the questions we have at this point. I know you all have some more presentation to go. Rebecca, did you want to say something else? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I saw pop up like, how do I say no, or something about no. I couldn't read it like word for word, right? But I like to tell my clients, right? No is a complete sentence, right? Like if someone asks you a question and your answer is no, right? Like that needs to be respected, and that in itself is a boundary. Can I come help you? No, I don't have time, right? Like, it is what it is.
And you know what? The no is a complete sentence means I don't owe you an explanation.
It's true.
If you tell people no and don't give them an explanation, watch how you're capable of identifying the really problematic people in your life. Because if you tell them no without giving them an explanation and they attempt to manipulate your boundaries, well, you know you've got a person in pre-contemplation and you've got to push that boundary forward. If you tell them no and without an explanation and they're capable of accepting that, then you know you've got a secure attachment.
Yeah.
These are wonderful. These are absolutely amazing. I don't want to stop your presentation. Do you have any more slides to keep going through?
We do, not many, but we have a few.
Not a problem. And I know as the questions come back in and you want to readdress, we'll read them as we go.
Okay. So here are some suggestions for codependency. And this may help with the person who asked the question about how to say no. Stop looking at yourself like a victim. And I know that's hard when people are out here doing you wrong. But we have to acknowledge our role in allowing people to treat us poorly. That's what I mean by that. Trust yourself, trust your gut. Do not allow people to gaslight you or tell you you're just crazy or you're overthinking this. No, if your gut says you're hurt, you are hurt. A lot of times people don't recognize that anger is an arm of your self-esteem. Anger is your self-esteem's way of saying, hey, my boundary has been violated. Feel your feelings, be compassionate to yourself, Don't torment yourself. No self-doubt. That goes along with trusting your gut. Don't react. Stop, think about your reaction, and then react. And I'll give you guys a coping mechanism for that after this. Detach emotionally. Now, what we mean by that is step away from the situation emotionally and think about it mentally. Become responsible. Put your needs first. Prioritize your needs. Exercise your rights. Face reality. Because a lot of times with people that we love who are chronic boundary violators, it's easy to get our heartstrings tugged at. So the rest are pretty much self-understood, and I don't want to do death by PowerPoint. Rebecca, what are your suggestions for this particular instance?
Well, my suggestion is if you are the individual and you have heard some of this stuff and realize that you're the codependent individual, then this is like that opportunity for you to like seek professional help or to like you know, do some self-help, like read about this topic and figure out what you need to do to move forward. If you hear about this and you're like, wow, the other person is the one codependent on me, I think that's when you need to like stop and like figure out how to set those new expectations, those boundaries that maybe aren't new, but like need to be in place.
Agreed. And it's not easy because as you set these boundaries, what you're doing, and Rebecca shared this with me one day, and I will never forget it. It's some of the best advice that I've ever gotten. The way you allow people to treat you teaches them how to treat you. I can't remember how you said it. Say it. What did you say?
Yeah, well, we do teach other people how they can treat us. If they do something and I don't set a boundary, I don't speak up and say that is not okay, you cannot treat me like that, then they have then learned that that is okay. And so I think you have to really be cognizant on what is appropriate in your relationships for you, and like this stop self-doubt number 6 up here, right? Don't doubt how you feel, right? And I feel like it's a cliche thing to say, like your feelings are valid, but it's almost not cliche because it's so true. You have to understand yourself from that, you know, conscious mind and like how you feel inside. So, you know, you have to address that with it. And if they're family members, if this is somebody that you're in an intimate relationship with, you have to tell them what is okay and what is not okay and how to treat you. And if, like Amani said before, if they don't respect that, then you need to reevaluate if that is a relationship that you should be a part of.
Now I remember what you said. What you allow from other people teaches them how to treat you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a gem, okay? Major alert. All right, the next slide is yours.
Okay, so if we've got some psych majors in here, you will recognize these right off the bat as John Gottman's 4 horsemen. These are things that come up as evident in divorces, right? They are pretty much almost always there. I didn't want to like bring up this slide just as like that marriage topics, because if we're going to talk about these, but I'm under the assumption that if this is happening within your friendships or within your extended family, this is going to probably cause multiple relationships to end, not just a marriage. And so those things are criticism, right? Which is when I have a problem with what somebody does, but instead of addressing the behavior, I go ahead and attack the person, right? Like, how dare you not call me, right? Like, you're so selfish, you never call me when you're late, right? That is very different than, hey, you know, it seems like you were running late. I thought we decided we were going to call each other when that happened, right? And so, you know, the opposite coping skill for this, right, instead of engaging in criticism, is to clearly state what you need, right, which we've been saying this whole time, right? I need you to call me if you're going to be late. I sit here worried, right? So the next one is like building on that criticism, right? It's contempt. So it's not only a criticism, but it is also coming from a place of higher superiority or morality or whatever you call it. And if we've got any parents in the room, like I unfortunately hear this from parents a lot, right? Like, you didn't even clean your room? Like, I worked, I cleaned, I did the dishes, right? And so we have to also remember that the perspective of the person, right? That kid might have been doing their homework. They might have been helping their friend with a problem. They might have done 100 things that day, right? And your focus might be on them cleaning their room, but they really did do things that day. And it's not any less important than what you've done. It's just different. So we have to kind of like remember the other person's perspective, especially if we're engaging in contempt. So defensiveness is a result of some of the other things here on the slide, right? And that is a huge problem in relationships, because if we're defensive, we are not moving forward, right? And I think that we see this in politics today, right? Where one side is super like this and the other side is super like this. And instead of moving forward together, right, it's just going back and forth on the same topic and nobody's making progress. And so you don't want to be defensive in a relationship. You don't want to have your walls up, because that's going to prevent you from moving forward with that family member. So you want to be able to accept responsibility. If I was supposed to call Susan and tell her about dinner on Christmas and I didn't do it, like, I'm so sorry, I didn't call Susan, let me do it right now, right? Instead of like, you knew I was busy, you do it, right? Like, so, and then the last one, which Amani brought up earlier, I want to make sure you guys know what stonewalling is. Stonewalling is literally the act of ignoring someone to their face, right? I don't think there's like a happy way to put this, right? Like someone's talking to you and you're acting busy, or they've asked you a direct question and you leave the room, right? And this is really damaging, because it's basically saying you're invisible, I don't care about you, what you have to say is not important. And so some coping skills that go along with this, right? For stonewalling, you want to set a timeout. I'm not in a place that I can talk to you right now. I'm not in a place I can answer that question. Come back in 15 minutes, right? And then that person needs to be engaging in calming coping skills, in a distraction, so like their brain can keep working on that issue. And when the person comes back, you guys can have a conversation about it. And I think that's like a hang up. People aren't good at calling the timeout. It's like we're in an argument and it escalates and it escalates and it escalates. And that you're not going forward. Like if that is happening in your relationships, someone has to say, this is escalating, we need to take a break. The conversation's not over, it's just postponed until we're calm enough to actually talk to each other. A coping skill for defensiveness is to try to provide more positive interactions than negative interactions, right? They have like in the research, they have this 5-to-1 ratio that you need 5 positive interactions to combat every 1 negative interaction, right? And so like that can kind of be like, whew, when you like really sit back and think about like your relationships, like, am I really offsetting the negative ones? And so coping skill for contempt is to practice telling the person what you're grateful for, right? Which is kind of like the opposite, right? You know, I noticed you took the trash out. That really helped me out, right? Like, and it doesn't have to be like great big things. Like, oh, I know you worked an extra hour today. Like, thank you so much, right? It's not hard to implement these things. You just have to add them to what you're already doing. So, yeah. And then I already said the coping skill for criticism. You just have to be clear. You have to be speaking in a respectful way. You have to have those expectations. So, Moni,
there is nothing I could add to that would make it better than what you said. I was over here having church. So I loved everything you said. It was perfect. I'm gonna go on to the next slide in the you know, to respect time here. So here's a coping skill we want to give you guys so that you guys are able to manage your own thoughts, things that trigger you, and deciding to maybe engage in a new behavior. Thought stopping. Now that's easier said than done, right? How do I just turn off my thoughts? It's not really how it works. So I'm going to explain this to you. This is what we call a cognitive triangle, meaning a thought triangle. What we think, what we feel affects how we choose to behave. Thoughts and feelings are visitors. Behaviors are quantifiable, meaning we can count them, right? So let's start with the top part. An event occurs it may trigger some thoughts. And the thoughts and the feelings go hand in hand, right? So there's this particular example that I like to use in cognitive behavioral therapy. In cognitive behavioral therapy, what we try to do is teach people how to change their thoughts, therefore change their behavior. So an event may occur, right? And that event may be, say, for example, your husband is always late, or your husband has a hard time showing up, or your wife is always late, or your wife always has a hard time showing up, or any significant other, any family member, right? Because of that, you may start to think or believe that this person doesn't care about you. That's the thought. What we think affects how we feel. So the feeling that comes out of that may be isolation. It may be depression. It may be no one cares about me, right? We start to compound these things. And then that affects our behavior. So if a person is feeling down and out, they might not be able to concentrate on their work. They may not be able to get the best quality of work or be able to focus on the things that they have going on in their current life, right? So what the cognitive triangle teaches one to do is to identify thoughts and feelings and pull out the stuff that's BS, right? So we have thoughts, we have feelings, but what we want to do is take a look at the feelings and identify what's reality-based and what is not, right? Because you're allowed to have feelings all you want to, but some of them are helpful and some of them are unhelpful. For example, one of the examples I gave on feelings was nobody likes me. That's all or nothing thinking. Is it really true that no one likes you? So when you identify that problematic feeling, you have to start addressing, wait a minute, there are people that like me. See, I got my mama, I've got that one friend, I've got this friend, I've got that person. And then based on acknowledging the more reality-based feelings, then you choose a behavior that's not harmful to you or your relationship. This is a cognitive triangle. A lot of times we are taught to numb our feelings or to try and block them out. The average human is not taught how to sit with uncomfortable feelings and sift through them and identify what's reality-based and what's not. We have to get comfortable sitting with those uncomfortable feelings and identifying what's really what, and then choosing behaviors that don't harm us or our relationships.
Right. And every feeling has a legitimate reason, right? Sadness causes us to pause and reflect, where anger is a warning sign that someone might not be treating us right or we're in an unsafe environment. And so we can have inappropriate reactions from our emotions, but our emotions come from a place of making us whole and like grounded. If we're feeling something that's uncomfortable, that needs to be like a warning sign for you that something is not right, like something about this. So, but yeah, and I think, like, you know, when I look at the cognitive triangle, it can be a dangerous place, right? Because if the thought is something like, I'm going to fail the math test, then my behavior might be to not study, and then, you know, or my feeling might be like feeling overwhelmed, and then my behavior might not be to study, and then I might actually fail the math test. And so we have to be really conscious too with what we're telling ourselves, because in a way they can turn into like self-fulfilling prophecies. So
now here's how to use the cognitive triangle in an application sort of way. You identify the thoughts and the feelings and you write them down. And then you choose positive thoughts to replace the negative or the problematic ones. Right. And you write those next to them. Some people like to cross out the negative one and write down the positive one that replaces it.
Right.
And then based on that, you choose a behavior.
And this can be a really good thing for you to do before you go over to those holidays, right? Because if you're telling yourself, oh, Susan, she's going to do it again for me, like she's going to be rubbing me the wrong way the whole time, right? Like unintentionally, like your feelings and behaviors might like make you more anxious about just thinking about that situation. If you go in there like, I'm going to be fine, I'm taking my coping skills, you know, my dysfunctional family can do whatever they want and I'm going to cope with it, then that can really greatly affect how you feel and behave in response to that positive thought.
All right, so I think we're at our last slide. So we wanted to offer you some places that you can go and get support, because having these conversations is great. However, there are times where we may want to talk to someone in a private setting, right? Who can really get to know us. So I want to start with the bottom one. The easiest way to access help is through your insurance provider. That's also the cheapest way a lot of times, right? Flip over the back of that insurance card and call the number on there, okay? That's an easy way to start. They can email you a list of providers in your area. And not just for mental health, maybe for case management. Maybe you need help finding someone that can help assist with rent payment. Maybe you missed your rent because of the pandemic and you're furloughed. So don't think of mental health as just mental health. Mental health professionals also offer case management. That's what me and Rebecca used to do. Down at homeless shelters, all sorts of places we've offered case management. The Department of Juvenile Justice, trying to keep people from, being convicted of things. Mental health professionals offer case management, okay? Because most of us have a bachelor's degree in the social sciences field, which makes us qualified to offer case management. And the beautiful thing about case management is all it is connecting you to resources that you didn't know exist. That's what it is. So you can get case management, or you can get mental health services, behavioral health services, counseling, any of those things by flipping over the back of that insurance card and calling them. I've had them email me a list of providers. Very convenient. They know your address. They'll give you a little 10-mile, 5-mile radius of what providers are in the area that take your insurance.
Yeah.
The next step is 211. Most of the counties, if not all, I don't want to misspeak, have the 211. You dial 211 and someone will pick up, more than likely a case manager. They can tell you where you can get counseling, where you can get help, where you can get connected to community resources for whatever one of your basic needs, whatever of your basic needs are lacking. They can help connect you to those things. In the Tallahassee area, it's 211 Big Bend. Down here in South Florida, it's just straight up 211. Each county has one, and they will connect you to people. A lot of times 211 can also straight up write you a referral.
Yeah.
Very convenient.
Yeah. And they're also good to ask too, like, because, like Monty and I are LCSWs, right? We kind of do a little bit of everything, right? And you've got your marriage and family therapists, which just work on like separation, divorce, like those family dynamic issues, those social roles kind of things. You've got like mental health counselors that do a little bit of everything too. So they'll also be able to assist with what services you specifically need or your family specifically needs.
Yes, because a lot of times it's easy for us as professionals to know what all these terms mean.
Yeah.
But the average person doesn't know the difference between case management, a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, right? Psychiatrists do medication. Psychologists do therapy. They have PhDs, and then you've got clinical psychotherapists like me and Rebecca. But the type of clinical psychotherapist we are is called a clinical social worker. So we do both social work and clinical psychotherapy. Then, as she said, you have your marriage and family therapists who specialize in marriage and family issues. You've got your licensed mental health counselors who are similar to LCSWs. They kind of are like a catch-all. They do it all. You've got your guidance counselors, right, who specialize in working in school settings, right? So they will help connect you to the specific resource that is most appropriate for your need. Now, I included 3 websites that are very popular in our world. They're easy places to go and find a therapist or find a case manager or find help. I included Open Path Collective because it's low cost. As a therapist, in order to list on Open Path Collective, you have to have at least some services that are less than $65. They're a great resource for college kids, people without insurance. I mean, any number of things. A lot of the therapists or clinicians or case managers on there have a sliding fee scale where the cost is based on what you earn, okay? You've got Therapy for Black Girls, which is very popular in minority communities, right? It's a great place to go find yourself a minority therapist, which is important for a lot of people. People want someone that understands their walk and their struggle and someone that they can connect to, right? And it's not just Black women listed on there, it's Black men. I've seen Latin, I've seen Asian, I've seen all sorts of minority folk on there, but it was started by a Black woman. So the vast majority of the therapists on there are Black women. I'm listed on therapy for Black girls. Then you've got Psychology Today. That is like the biggest one. Most people are listed on Psychology Today. And again, all three of these, you pump in your zip code or your address and it'll shoot you out a nice list. They even have filters. Do you want a man? Do you want a woman? Do you want someone who's LGBTQIA? I mean, any number of things. Someone who speaks this language, someone who speaks that language. What insurance do they take? So those are some great resources. Rebecca, can you think of any other ones that I may have missed?
No, I mean, I think this is a great place to start, you know? So I was going to ask Derek if we had any last questions that needed to be answered.
I'm going to stop screen sharing here.
Yeah.
No problem. Wonderful point. So we did actually have two more questions, and I think, Rebecca, I know you do have a conflict at once. I will try to be quick here. The first one was, the first one was in regards to unhealthy relationships with family members, right? Do you think it's best to maintain a distance relationship or to completely cut ties?
See, and that is difficult, right? Because without the context, like, is this an unsafe relationship? Like, how is this affecting your mental health? I think there's like a lot of factors that we don't know. And so like my advice would be that if you want to be the person in the relationship that you would want to be treated, right? So like keep that line of communication open, but like if that person isn't willing to give you what you need or support you or encourage you or listen to you, right? Then like you have to have something in between, right? Like you can't continue to engage in a relationship that would be considered toxic or codependent. But like whether you want to close that door forever or not, that is an individual therapy situation.
I have a response for that, but it's going to seem double-minded. So culturally, some folks just aren't going to cut off certain family members just because that's not what they do culturally. And if you are one of those people, then my advice is to, I'm trying to protect myself legally here. What I would do is I would set very firm boundaries with that person if I know that I'm not capable of cutting this person completely off. I would put some distance between myself and that person, set and hold boundaries. And remember, you do not pull the boundary back unless the person earns it with appropriate behavior. Now, if you are from a space where culturally it is not an issue to cut a family member off, there is nothing wrong with doing that either. Some people are so toxic that you must let them go. Yeah. And that is fine.
I mean, this is 2020. We don't choose the families that we're born into, but we do get to pick people that can provide us the support and encouragement and bond and connections that we deserve.
Oh, yeah. Great. Second question here is a little bit more lighthearted, but any tips on controlling body language reactions? The person who submitted this said that, you know, I can control how I respond verbally, but I tend to wear my emotions on my face. So any thoughts about that?
I think there's nothing wrong with wearing your emotions on your face, because at that point, what you're doing is you're telling people the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And so they're responding to the most genuine version of who you are. And I respect people who are capable of being their truest, genuine self. One of the things that we've learned is that transparency and likability are positively correlated, meaning people who are honest and transparent and give you their true, genuine self, even if you don't like what they're saying or how they're responding, you have no choice but to respect it because you know they're telling you the truth, right? When you try to mask who you really are and how you really feel, well, then how can you get your needs met? Right. So if I were you, I would just be the truest version of myself. And when you're the truest version of yourself, you attract people who are capable of managing the real you.
Yes. I was going to say something similar, right? Like if someone says something to you and it causes a visual response, well, then they need to really think about what they've just said to you, right? Or like their part in it, you know? Like you are not lying by like wearing your emotions on your sleeve. Like it's coming from somewhere, right?
Perfect. Well, I want to first of all say thank you both again, and please in the chat also send your thank yous to both Imani and Rebecca. You all have left us with so much more. I thought I was just hosting this, but I just had a slight therapy session. So thank you in between this work day. A couple takeaways that I had here. No is a complete sentence. Doesn't need an explanation, right? Avoid the manipulation afterwards, right? Second one, schedule self-care before you're exhausted, right? So 3 self-care activities a week, or even schedule time to complain, despite church hymns or cultural, identities that may say otherwise. The third one is be honest, right? Whether that's what you need in a relationship, whether that's about your fears and feelings, but also your why. I think these were great takeaways. Of course, this is going to be available via recording, but if either of you could probably drop in the chat or say vocally how people could connect with you via LinkedIn if you're there, or I know you all gave the links, but if people want to connect with you on a one-on-one basis, is that possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Got it. So we can drop your LinkedIn handles there. But again, thank you all for joining. This was an amazing webinar series on how to navigate relationships throughout the holiday. And I hope that you all find your tribe, find those people to connect with, to support you throughout these uncertain times. And until next time, take care. And as always, go Noles.
Yes, go Noles.
Go Noles.